Okay, so as we start the second half of our program today, as I said, because the regulatory panel ran a little longer, I didn't want to take that opportunity away from everybody to have those chances to ask those questions. So our next presenter agreed to go after lunch, which, by the way, if you do these at all, you understand that she now has the unenvious task of the most difficult spot of the entire day. Because y'all just ate, okay, if you liked the meal, please make sure you tell that to the hotel staff. The chef and his group I think did an excellent job in preparing and putting out food for 400 people. That's not easy. So again, as we go through this, sometime throughout the day we'll put up the QR for the feedback form. Please do your feedback. We really do want to hear what you guys want, because that's how we'll shape the next one we do. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Teresa Telesco. She is our Assistant Director for the Office of Export Analysis. She's the one that does I guess she's in charge of making sure I do my job. So she's got a lot of work to do. But anyway, Teresa, go ahead and have fun.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Hello, everyone. I will try to help keep you guys awake after lunch. So let me start with the worst case scenario. Up on the screen here are just a few examples from recent U.S. Department of Justice press releases of people who were arrested and sentenced for conspiring to illegally export controlled items from the United States. While these are successful outcomes of cases, and we like these kind of outcomes on cases, excuse me, this is not what we actually want to have happen. We don't want it to get this far. We want to stop things from getting into the hands of bad people before we even have to have cases. So what we really want to do is help you to operate within the export control system successfully rather than throwing you in jail. That's what we would rather have. We would rather have you work successfully. So by working together, government and industry, we help keep our economies and nations both thriving and secure. You may think, oh, I don't really deal with nuclear items, I don't deal with missiles, this doesn't really apply to me. Well, weapons of mass destruction and military programs seek a broad range of technologies, and even less sophisticated items can have a significant contribution to those programs that would do us harm. So if you're not following the steps, if you don't have that internal compliance program, your next customer could be a WMD program. You need to make sure that you are doing what you can to keep that from happening. Fortunately, you don't have to come up with how to do this by yourself. BIS has Know Your Customer guidance that is both in our regulations and on our website that gives you information on how you should act under the knowledge standard of the EAR. So make sure that you know. The big thing is just not to self-blind yourself. Look for the red flags that are happening and ask the questions and get the answers to those questions before engaging in transactions. Don't turn a blind eye. And if you have questions when you run into one of these red flags, you are more than welcome to contact us, and many companies do, and we help them and we walk them through, well, this was the situation here, but now this is what you're encountering now, this is how we recommend you deal with this. So you are more than welcome to contact us and ask us for help. And I'm sure the same can be said for the authorities in your own countries as well. So the red flags, which are also in that guidance, these are the things that you should be looking at to keep from self-blinding yourself. Looking at whether this company that has approached you, do they have a background, or were they just created yesterday? Can you find anything about them on the internet? It's amazing what a simple Google search or whatever your preferred search engine will tell you about a company. Are they unfamiliar with the product they're trying to buy but want it anyway? Do they not understand what the technical parameters of the integrated circuit or the graphite or what have you are? The routine service that would normally come with an item, such as a machine tool. Do they decline that? Because that's very strange. Why would somebody decline training or maintenance or installation? If their delivery dates that they put forward are really vague, or it's a very strange routing to an out-of-the-way destination that doesn't make sense. If you're in Singapore, excuse me, and you're selling to a company, let's say China, and the routing goes through South Africa, that might be a little bit weird. So just pay attention to something like that. If a freight forwarding firm is listed as the final end user, you should know that it's probably going somewhere else. Yes, freight forwarding firms do need certain items for their business, but if it's a massive multi-million-dollar machine tool, they're probably not using it, so it means it's going somewhere else, and you need to ask those questions. And also, the big thing is when you ask questions about what the item is, where it's going, how it's being used, if they're evasive, if they're unclear about what's going to happen with it, if it's going to be a domestic use, if they're going to re-export it, if they don't want to answer these questions, that is a very significant red flag when you're dealing with these transactions. We also have a couple of new red flag indicators for 600 series or munitions items. Singapore is one of our largest recipients of 600 series items, so if you're dealing with a company who wants to export one of these munitions items to a country that you know they don't have that system. If it's for an airplane system, that you just know they're not operating that. Big red flag. And also, if they make statements that give you reason to believe it's going to a prohibited country or a country that's under an arms embargo, what we call a D5 country. Those are things to look out for. So the best way to know your customers is through an effective compliance program. And this has been mentioned by many of our partners, which I'm always pleased to see people talk about these programs. And there are steps that you need to make sure you have. Have that management commitment from the top down that everyone's buying in, that you have a risk assessment built into your plan to look for these red flags that we talk about, and have it written down, have it on paper. And have training. Train your staff constantly, not just once and done, but routinely, so that they know what your plan is, what they should be looking for. Screen a party multiple times, because sometimes sales, depending on what business you're in, can take a very long time. So you could screen it once when they first approach you for a quote, but it could be months, if not years later, before the sale actually goes through. So screen them again. Keep records. I know that our regulations have very specific time frame on how long you need to have records relating to transactions. I can't speak to any of your host countries, but make sure you're keeping those records and that you know where they are. And audit your program. Make sure it works. Just don't put it on paper and then say, okay, we're good. I don't need to deal with this again. Audit it to make sure it's working. And have a plan to deal with violations. Obviously, the best case scenario is you're not having any violations, but they do happen, and we do realize this. So have a plan. What do you do when you find out that something has happened, something's gone wrong? And what corrective actions would you take in order to do that? Having this compliance program reduces the case of that worst case scenario I talked about in the beginning, where people are being arrested, are being fined, being thrown in jail. They help establish you as a reliable company as part of the supply chain. And if a violation should occur, at least as far as our regulations are concerned, we consider if you have a compliance program, that's a mitigating factor for any punishment or penalty that might happen. If you were trying, if you had the compliance program in place, you were asking the questions and you just missed something, that is taken into account. So the arrests that we do may get the most attention, but the key to our enforcement program is outreach to industry, like this event right here, and educating industry on what the regulations are, how to avoid and prevent violations. So we do these seminars and workshops, not only in the United States, but obviously all over the world. We have materials available on our website, not only guidance such as Don't Let This Happen to You, which is the really exciting, these are people that we found were violating things and this is what happened to them, but also how to follow our regulations. We have webinars on our website. We have active tools to help you work through decisions of is something controlled, is it not, is it eligible for certain license exceptions. But we also do company and outreach visits, both in the US and overseas. Now, Outside of the U.S., most of these outreach visits are done through our end-use check program, which Scott is in charge of here. I'm sure that some of you have been visited by him. So these end-use checks have multiple purposes for us. We confirm what we call the bona fides, which is the reliability of a company and the transaction. Are they who they say they are? Are they using the item how they're supposed to be? We also use it as an opportunity to educate companies about our regulations, and it's a confidence-building measure. If we have a favorable end-use check, which the majority of our end-use checks are favorable, then we have a certain level of trust in your company that you're doing what you should be doing and that we can allow controlled items to be licensed to you, and the license process goes a lot faster. Unfortunately, not all of the companies that we do end-use checks at are favorable. Some of them are unverified. We can't find them. We've had some where the address just doesn't exist. We show up and it's an empty lot, or they're unfavorable. So there are consequences to that. We have our internal watch list where we're wanting to just give a little bit more scrutiny to any license applications that come through our system. Maybe add some conditions on there, do some more end-use checks, maybe even reject a license depending on how severe the unfavorable check was. We have our unverified list for those companies where we can't verify their reliability or legitimacy. So that alerts industry to exercise a bit more due diligence, to follow through on those red flags a bit more closely. And any company that's on the unverified list is not allowed to receive U.S. items under license exception. So you would have to come in for a license from us if you wanted to ship to them. There is our entity list, which imposes restrictions on exports, usually through a license requirement, on foreign persons involved in activities deemed to be contrary to U.S. national security or foreign policy. So basically, if a company is on the entity list, a license is required, and there are different presumptions of approval or denial based on what the item is and who the company is and why they're on there. And then, of course, the company and the results could be forwarded for further investigation and could result in criminal or administrative penalties, which, as I said before, is our worst case scenario. So our criminal penalties, which are imposed for willful violations, individuals can be fined $1 million and or 20 years of jail time. Companies can be fined $1 million. There also could be forfeitures of the proceeds of the export violations. Administrative penalties, which follow a strict liability standard, are either the higher of $300,000 or twice the value of the transaction. So depending on what it is, it could be a lot of money. There could also be a denial of export privileges, which means that whoever is on that list, whether it is a U.S. or foreign party, cannot participate in any export activity from the United States. There are temporary additions, and then there are our standard additions, which could be 10 years or more, depending on the severity of the violation. And then those public screening lists I mentioned before. But this is not where we want you to be. We want to help people have good compliance programs to stop these items from getting into the hands of people who want to harm us, to keep it out of weapons of mass destruction programs. And so we are here to help you. Any questions you have, please let us know. I'm not sure why my director's name is on this slide, but thank you very much for your attention. Yes, that means he's answering the questions. I like that arrangement. So thank you very much, and I'm around if you have any questions.
Thank you, Teresa. Let me add a few points to her slides since I am the ECO in the region. Number one, have I mentioned that Singapore Customs program called Trade First yet today? Have I mentioned that a few times? That goes a long way, and I'm not kidding. If you're applying for an export license or part of an export license from BIS, and you produce a Trade First certificate that puts you in the platinum band, I believe it is, that you have eligibility for bulk licensing permits under Singapore Customs, we're going to look at that. If I come out and do an end-use check at your location, and you have the Trade First plaques up on the wall, and I talk to my customs officers that are coming with me on this end-use check, and they tell me you're part of the Trade First program, I'm going to look at that. That's a, as they call it back in Texas, a clue. Okay, so Teresa, thank you. That was some great information. The red flags, they're posted on our website. They're posted, I believe, on everyone else's website that has spoken today. Take advantage of those. They're important because they're great training material for new sales staff, for new compliance officers, more importantly, for your shipping clerks. Because when you're using a freight forwarder as the end user of a very expensive, very fragile piece of machinery or a bunch of electronic components, that's, as we call in Texas, a clue that you might want to look at. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next panel of the day. First, let me introduce George Tan, who is going to be acting as our facilitator. George is an old hat at this. George was doing compliance before compliance was cool. He's got some amazing experience. He's actually going to wear two hats today during his panel. He's going to be acting as a facilitator, but he's also going to be using his experience in what he's done in his career to kind of help you out. Because the whole point of this next panel is you're going to see some large multinational companies up there, and you're, as a small company, you're going to go, I don't have the time, the effort, the energy, or the money to do that. But there's so many different steps you can take to get to an effective compliance program, even if you're a company of 5. And I'm not kidding. These are the group that you want to ask those questions on. If you're a small forwarding company, if you're a logistics company, if you want to go into to distribution of items, if you want to make something, if you have some of these new emerging technologies that Alex was talking about earlier today, or that our Dr. Isla from BAFA was talking about, take this opportunity to get with these folks and find out, how do I make sure I don't end up on Teresa's bad list? Or how do I make sure I don't become the first successful prosecution in the Philippines? Take the chance. So George, come on up. I'm going to let each one of our panelists give their little quick introduction on themselves. And then our person from Keysight. Where'd she go? Oh, there she is. Sorry. And then, sir, from our Japanese company, if you guys will come up on stage. So it's Takeo Yamagata, the General Manager of Export Compliance Department of Yokogawa Electronics Corporation in Japan. And we have Yip Yin Peng, Manager of the Asia Pacific Export Control and Classification Group at Keysight Technologies in Malaysia.
Hello. Thank you, Scott. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. After your heavy lunch, is everybody still awake? Okay, I think it will be good to have some exercise. I'm going to start with first questions. I always like to ask questions. How many of you here in the audience, you have your own internal compliance program? Please raise your hand. Please raise. Good. How many of you here are from the SME, small, medium-sized enterprise? Good. I know most of the multinational companies, if you are handling strategic items, usually you will have a very robust internal compliance program. But there are many companies, and especially when Mr. Higari mentioned, in Japan, they are also facing challenge on how to reach out to SME. So today, we have some example here for you to look up to. Don't just listen, but to reflect and review what you have in your internal compliance program. The two different distinguished companies, they have long history in terms of compliance. So it will be very good for you to review your internal process to make sure that you keep up to the date, especially with the new implications of, for example, emerging technologies. And to start off with, I would like to invite from Yokogawa to give his presentation. And before that, you can do your own self-introductions.
Good afternoon. My name is Takeo Kamagata, and I am the General Manager of Export Compliance Department of Yokogawa Electric Corporation. I am honored to have an opportunity to talk about our export control operation today. First, I think I need to explain about our company. This is a brief explanation of our business. The Yokogawa Electric Corporation was founded in 1915, about 100 years ago, as a manufacturer of electrical measuring instruments. Our products are not consumer products, but used in industrial applications. The current annual sales is approximately 3,600 million US dollars. And the number of employees is about 19,000 worldwide. Our headquarters office is located in Tokyo, Japan, where product development takes place. Our major business today is industrial process automation and control. And our products are installed in various types of users' production plants, such as oil, chemical, and these industries. Our products measure and control physical values like pressure, temperature, flow rate in the process, and then control those values to achieve the optimum production. The product specifications varies from application to application, so we provide many kinds of products. We do not sell our products from Japan directly. Instead, we have 100 affiliates through the world serving worldwide markets. Now I would like to explain our business from the viewpoint of export control. First of all, 70% of our global sales is coming from overseas markets, and we export approximately 10,000 orders every month. That's very many. And one of the highest selling application is oil plants. You see the picture here. And as you can imagine, there are many concerned countries in oil-producing countries like Middle East regions. And our sales channel spreads all over the world, and the transaction check is done at our overseas offices. And we have to handle many transactions with those concerned countries. So steady export control, including our overseas sales office, is very, very important for us. We have established ICP, which is an internal compliance program, to clarify the role and mission and procedures. Under the responsibility of corporate president, I have 12 people who are 100% dedicated their time to export control operation. These people are knowledgeable about export control regulations and assist in the guidance of operation to the entire organizations. And we also assign approximately 140 people to support the promotion of export control in each organization. Among export control tasks, I'd like to talk about the three major tasks. The first one, the production classification task. This is fully incorporated into our product launch procedures. On average, 250 items in a month are classified into either controlled item or non-controlled item. But our products are rarely falling under controlled items. We do not have so many controlled items. The primary classification is done by Product Development Department, and the Export Compliance Department confirms that all of them are correctly classified. I'd like to talk about the transaction check later. And a shipping check, this means a physical check and a document check before shipment. This is also a very important task to confirm that all export orders comply with procedures and regulations. Now let me talk about transaction check practice. As I explained, we export about 10,000 orders every month. We cannot miss any of non-compliant order because only one careless transaction could jeopardize the entire Yokoga group. We need to check all transactions before export. But it is physically impossible to check all of 10,000 orders by only 12 dedicated people who are dedicated to export control. So we have introduced what we call waiting management for transaction checks. Let me explain about this. The rule is quite simple. The sales department, including overseas sales offices, have a responsibility to check the transaction before accepting the orders from customers. There are 6 key questions as you see here. If the transaction applies to any of these questions, we define it as a sensitive case transaction. And then sales department always must issue transaction check and approval request sheet to export compliance department for transaction approval. For example, like question number 4, we specify 15 countries called specific countries, which are the designated countries by regulations or our own designation considering geographical concerns. If the sales departments receive inquiries from any of those countries, they need to have our approval before accepting orders. When we, export compliance department, approve the transaction, we give them an approval number, and they need to enter the approval number when they enter the order for internal order entry system. For the sensitive case, when we receive the transaction check approval from the sales office, we make thorough transaction checks using various information sources shown here. And we sometimes ask for a statement of compliance from the end users. This is how it works for transaction checks. And in this manner, we receive, export compliance department, receive approximately 200 transaction check requests every month from sales organizations. I think this rule is quite simple and clear and easy to follow, but just making rule is not enough, I think, because there exists some risks. If you look at this picture, you will understand total 10,000 orders are flowing every month, and only 200 transactions we can check before accepting the orders. In other words, the rest of 9,800 goes into order entry system without having our checks, right? So we don't know if the sales department does not check by themselves. We never know. So this is the first risk. And the second risk is sales department recognizes this rule, but they may make a wrong judgment. For example, I said a specific country, or they have to have our approval. But if they forget, they may enter the order without having our approval. So this is the second risk. And the third risk is a discrepancy between our check contents and our actual order contents. For example, they might enter the order including non-checked items. In order to avoid these risks, we conduct final shipping check and screen all export orders before shipment. The sales office can enter the order by themselves, and once order is entered, the production automatically starts. But the system stops shipping until our members checks and release the orders. So shipping check members find sensitive case orders and confirms necessary requirements before releasing the orders. So when everything is clear, then they release the order and go to the export. So this is the whole system of our export control operations. Product classification and the transaction check and the final shipping check. In summary, our business relates to many concerned countries, and we need to be careful that our products are not diverted to concerned purposes. Our product classification is incorporated into regular development procedure, and every item is double-checked by Export Compliance Department. Transaction check is primarily done by Sales Department, and the Export Compliance Department checks all sensitive cases with waiting management. The final shipping check ensures all orders are compliant with regulations. This concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. We shall open the questions later after the two presenters finish their presentation. So shall I move to Yanping from Keysights?
Well, a very good afternoon to everyone. My name is Yan Peng. I'm the Asia Pacific Export Control and Classification Manager. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude on behalf of Keysight Singapore to Singapore Customs, the Japan MITI, and also the US government for giving us the opportunity to be one of the panelists in this session. So let me go through with you on the agenda. So I'll give you a brief on what is Keysight Technologies and also to show you the best practice guidelines on internal compliance program. So Keysight at a glance, Keysight is 3.2 billion revenue in fiscal year 17. And with that, let me bring you with a little history in the background. We started with Hewlett-Packard in 1939, and then we spin off and became the Agilent Technologies in 1999. And then in November 1st, in 2014, we become Keysight Technology as one of the independent company in the electronics measurement company. As you can see, our headquarters are in Santa Rosa, California. We have manufacturing and R&D locations in all over the world, in US, Europe, and Asia Pacific. We also have customer locations cut across 100+ countries. Now, what does Keysight industry segments? Now, we have several segments break into 4. One is on the communications. The communication is we have the experts in processing the measurement across the broadest frequency ranges and modulations, especially in the 5G and also the Internet of Things. Second is the network test, visibility, and security. With the merger and acquisition of Ixia, we have the expertise in large-scale traffic and security attack simulation combined with data access into operations. Thirdly is on the electronic industrial. We help customers from design, verification, and manufacturing to installation and maintenance. And lastly, the services. So not forgetting in just providing the products and technologies, we also do provide the services in terms of repair, calibrations, training, consultations, and assets. So what are the core solution platform and market position that Keysight has? These are some of the best-in-class solutions that Keysight provided, ranging from simulation software to ECR network tests and visibility. We have network analyzers, signal sources, and oscilloscopes. Next is to bring you what are the best practice guidelines on internal compliance program that we have. So the elements of internal compliance program, not forgetting, first of all, is the policy, the management commitment, the global trade policy statement, the designated employee, the distribution of regulatory material. In the next couple of slides, I'll give you a little more detail on what does it mean. Then we have training or record retention, the education or the training awareness, the record keeping, then followed by the screening, ranging from the order processing flow through the restricted party list screening, the product classification, country screening, the customer screening on the end user, on the enhanced proliferation control initiative screening, high-risk diversion profile, and lastly is the notification of non-compliance and evaluation. And the last element is the compliance review program, which is on the audit. Now, in the policy management commitment, it is Keysight Technologies. Since we are the US-based company, we need to comply with the US Export Administration Regulation, the EAR. And since we have Keysight Singapore present in Singapore, we also need to comply with the local requirements on the SGCA, Strategic Goods Control Act. Now, with that, we need to have an internal control program in place to comply with both country requirements from US and also Singapore as well. We have the global trade policy statement coming out from our president and CEO to all our Keysight employees to ensure that all employees are comply with the international trade regulations, be it from import and export control. If any incompliance that the employees has, it would end up the termination of employment. So next is on the training. So training will be conducted in several areas. First is on the self-paced e-learning. We also have classroom face-to-face. We also have WebEx sessions since we have location all over the world, and we conduct WebEx throughout the employees as well using the conference or a PC sharing. We have the government or industry workshops and seminars. Next element is on the record keeping. Now, with the local requirements, we have to ensure that there's a record keeping of 5 years. Any documents that are related to trade compliance we need to comply with, it must be kept, be it hard copy or soft copy. Now, what are the records to be maintained is on the license application that we applied with the Singapore government, with all the shipping documents like invoices, custom forms, and so on and so forth. And not forgetting the end user statement that we obtained from customers, it also needs to be kept. So next is I'm going to bring you on the screening from the end-to-end supply chain, ranging from the order processing flow. From the moment when we have a customer setup, we need to make sure there is restricted party screening and also embargo screening. Then followed by on the products, when there's a new product introductory, product classification has to be in place. We have a dedicated classification team to do the classification of HTS code and also on the ECCN code. Then when it comes to order booking, on the confirmation from customers, we have the order flow into our system. So that's where the trade compliance starts take effect on whether there's a missing classification or is there any export control related. So these will be screened before it can be shipped to the customers or to other places. Then last but not least is on the visit, training, and hiring screening as well. We also have visitors all over the world in the sites. We need to make sure that the visitors, be it from internal or external, has to be screened on the restricted party list or embargo. It could be from the training conducted, and not forgetting on the hiring screening as well. To hire a key site employee, we also need to make sure there's an RPL or an embargo screening. Screening on export control screening, we have to make sure that we only screen to authorized buyers in authorized locations for authorized purposes only. This is talking about the end user screening, that we need to make sure that we are not involved in the nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, and also missile technology. This is to ensure there are no high-risk diversion profile. From product specification, we have engineers to submit the technical specification, and we have the group D of the classifiers to classify based on the technical or the specification that is submitted by the engineers. So classifiers are having the background from technical background, and they can interpret from the regulation, latest regulations, or what comes from customs or comes from the export control regulations, and we need to comply with the latest regulation all over the world. We need to comply with the latest regulation from the US government. We also need to comply with the strategic goods control that recently implemented in November. So these are the regulations that the classifier plays heavily in interpreting what will be the classification or what are the changes to be made on our current product classification. So from the classification, we will only be able to know whether it's a subject to control or non-control, whether license or not that requires to be applied. So we have a dedicated export control in cut across the country as well to make sure that whenever there's a license application is required, and export control needs to apply the license application with the government. So next screening is to bring you on the systems. Of course, we can't just do manually on ourselves. We rely heavily on a system. Today, we are using the trade automation on how we book the orders are through Oracle. So Colombo is a tool by itself for the engineers to submit the technical specification. That's where it will link to our trade automation system. Then the classifiers can classify directly at the product level. Now from the Oracle booking itself, when we have a customer place orders, that's where you get to see all the order details will be placed in the Oracle system. And we have this Oracle system interface to our trade automation, and that's where the trade automation starts to do the RPL screening, the embargo screening on the customer that was placed in the order, and also to look into on the part number details, whether there's any classification check. And with the ship to country or the end use country, that's where the license determination starts to kick in within the trade automation itself. So we rely heavily on the system itself because we are talking about mega company, and it's really difficult if you are doing manual. So with that, the trade compliance system, when everything is checked successfully and to make sure there's no hole, then only the customs invoice will be generated for declaration. So the last element of all is the compliance review program. So we have many types of audit. There are on-site audit, there are remote site audit, and also focused self-assessment. Now with this export control context, we have export screening and also classification. And out of the audit context, we have country of origin, valuation, and also the transaction review audits. The audit system needs to be included, especially on the verification of the license of documents, the records of the export transactions, customer screening records, and to make sure that we have a compliance with the ICP procedure. And with that, I end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Key Sites. Well, you can see both Key Sites and Yokogawa, they are all precise measuring instruments company with software, with analyzer, and equipment. But you can see very distinctively the two ICP systems are pretty different. So that means the ICP itself have to fit into the company's culture, fit into the company's businesses. And each company have their own unique system. So I believe every one of you, your company, when you want to set up your ICP, you definitely need to review your internal process, your business nature, and the territories that you are involved, and what types of customers that you are looking at. So before I open for questions, let me quickly ask both of them two simple questions. First, I would like to check with both Yokogawa as well as key sites. What are the challenges that you face? Because you have about 12,000 of employees across the whole globe. Here you have about 18,000 of employees across the whole globe. How do you find, how difficult, or what are the challenges that you face when you implement this internal compliance program? Those are.
Thank you very much for the questions. For the difficulty for implementation of ICP, I've been working with export control for 9 years almost. But our company started the export control system maybe more than 20 years ago. And at that time, the ratio of export over sales is not so big like today. It is now 70% overseas sales, but at that time maybe 15% or 20%. So the people who are relating to export tasks is very limited. That's why I think the first challenge was to get the recognition from the people who are relating to export tasks. But gradually, the number of sales ratio is becoming larger. Then more people are getting involved with export tasks. Then we started education, and now we do e-learning to all employees, including the president. So it depends on the stage where you are now for the export. At the beginning, you have a limited people, gather them and train them, and then gradually you have to expand the objective people for education. Did I answer to your question?
Thank you. I think it's very obvious that you know they do it on the stage-by-stage basis based on the business growth. So the internal compliance program grow together with the business. This is a very obvious and a very good approach. How about key sites?
Okay, for Keysight, since we are the US-based company, so in order to comply with the internal control program, so we rely on, with our US counterpart, an internal control program. So we don't have the complication in that, but the challenges that we face is during the license applications, it's more on the end user statement, I would say. Because when we trigger the end user statement to get the confirmation or filling up the information by the customers, sometimes we do receive the reluctancy or the who will be signing off the end user statement. So the turnaround time that could be taken to get back to the, for us to apply the license application may prolong. And by looking at the market that we are talking about, we need to move in a fast pace. That's where I think everyone is also facing the similar issue as well.
Thank you. So different company, similar business nature, they face different challenge. Because from key sites, it is all centralized in America in terms of all the policy making. And so it depends again on the companies. So next I'd like to give some 1 or 2 tips to the company here when they want to introduce internal compliance program, particularly for the small, medium-sized company?
Okay. I think the key is how you design the total system, export control system, to cover all transactions. You have to check all transactions anyway. And regulations is very, very complicated. So I think it is very difficult for every employee to fully understand the detail of the regulations. But someone has to understand 100%. So I think there are two ways. The one way is you make a specialized organization which is dedicated to export control. All transactions goes to its organization. They check everything, and then they make a decision. And second way is you have the cooperation from all employees. Like I explained now, we made a simple rule for company internal rule from the regulations. We are not forcing employees to understand the regulation itself, but we encourage them to understand internal company rule, which is much easier than regulations. You need to follow internal company rule, then we will comply with regulations. That's what I'm saying, explain to the employees. So either one could work. So when the company size is small, you can make a special organization to handle everything about export control. But if your company is a very big size, you need to have the cooperation from all employees. So you need more educations to everybody, and important thing should be handled by the export compliance expert. So.
Yeah, I think the key points here too. First, whether it's a centralized export control systems in place in a company, especially when your company is smaller, or you have many tools to assist you to do automations, or it's a decentralized system that distribute to respective company, subsidiary, branches, so that they will handle export control accordingly. And only when sensitive transactions arise, it will be flow back to the central headquarters control. This is what exactly Yokogawa-san is doing. And the second thing is companies' rules is more important because every employee have to follow. If you do not have a strong company's rules, your export control system may not be successful. You know why? Because sometimes in certain companies, the company's rules could be stricter than the national legislation. For example, certain companies do not allow any transactions with Iran, although Iran at certain stage, the market is open for business. So this all depends on the companies, whether they want to take the risk or they have a higher control rather than just getting the business. How about you from Keysights?
I would say the recommendation for the SME are, first of all, is the management commitment. To get the management commitment to hire a resource that having the knowledge of trade compliance so that the trade compliance personnel or the officer can comply, knows the regulations and how to comply worldwide. And then secondly is the trade compliance systems. Like I mentioned before, it's very difficult to do the manual compliance check, transaction by transaction. So we need to have a company that can invest in a trade compliance system to do an automated check so that it will comprise us in all the elements to make sure that we don't ship in the wrong hands.
Thank you. I think it is again very clear cut. It is a top management's decisions. The company's top management have to make the decisions on how they want the system to be. And secondly, utilizing tools. There are tools available in terms of denial parties screening, license applications, processing, as well as other customs declarations. So I understand, for example, Yokogawa, they do build their own system, internal system, the IT system is 100% built by them, but they engage external parties to get their database to screen the denial party list. So, but for key sites, they have everything done through Oracle system, right?
We have the trade compliance system is actually engaging a third-party vendor called the Amber Road. So we applied an interface into Oracle for the compliance check.
Right. So you can see that similar types of businesses, similar types of industry, but the approach is very, very different. Okay, with that, I would like to open the question to the floor. Anybody who have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and mention your name and company and your questions.
Hi, thank you. I'm Pat. I'm from Poloto Network. So actually,
Sorry, we can't hear you. Can you speak louder?
yes, sure. I'm Pat. I'm from Poloto Networks. So actually, I would like to direct my question to Keysight. So my question is related to the last slide on the audit. So my question is that who performed the audit? Is that internal, or you hire the third party to do the audit?
So we have two types of audits. One is the internal audit, audits audited by within our export control headquarters and also regionals. And the other types is the external audits. So
Okay.
external audits is from the government, or it could be from others. Like for example, we have Singapore audits recently. That is the external audits. But to be the ICP, we need to make sure we cannot wait for the external audits. We need to have an internal audits within the company itself, so that it needs to be conducted at least once a year or 1.5 years, provided what you comply with the internal control program within that country.
Okay, all right. So my second question is that how many percentage you perform for the audit? Is that you say by year, right? It's annual, yes. How many percentage?
So audit, there are many elements that we need to cover. It's not just the export control elements. We are talking about the others elements as well, like the classification, whether you declare correctly or not, or whether you, country of origin, is there any country of origin when we declared, or is there any valuation issues? So we have the random sampling of transaction. It's not truly really random, but based on the shipment profiling, and there will be corporates determine on what will be the high-risk profiling of the shipment on the sampling, then it will be picked, and then it will be get audited.
Okay, all right. My last question, the last one is that, if you don't mind, would you please share your recent finding from the recent audit that you performed?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Would you, if you don't mind, would you share your recent finding from the audit? Is that? Oh.
Yeah, that might go a little bit into the weeds, so to say. But please share what you can.
I'm not too sure whether I'm allowed to share or
Yeah,
not.
I don't think so either. I think that's a great segue. I'm going to ask a question since George got us during the regulatory audit. And to both George, having done this for quite some time, and then to our two panelists, how important is it for senior leadership to be invested in compliance? Because a lot of times when you're dealing with smaller companies, the senior leadership doesn't know what compliance is. The senior leadership, like the CEOs, CFOs, COOs of the medium size, but then just the owners of smaller companies. How important is their investment into, and not just money, but time, into trade compliance?
Mm-hmm. Okay, the company president recognizes export control because we submit our ICP to Japan authority with the name of company president. And it's also a requirement from the Japan authority. And every year, we also report our actual export control records to the government. It's also another requirement for the companies which are registered in authorities.
Well, Keysight is a US-based company. Of course, it's a top-down from the management that our president and CEO itself from Ron to all Keysight's employees. We have to make sure it's non-negotiable when it comes to trade compliance rules and regulations. So during the orientation as well, especially on the new hires, they are made known well enough of the trade compliance that they need to comply with. If there's non-compliance, there will be termination of employee right away. And this is no joke because we are talking about the business of that, especially in sales, that could end up in the wrong hands. So with that, I think it is very important, not just within our company, throughout in the entire of the world. Whenever we want to do business, it's very important to know what are the rules and regulations that we need to comply with. And it's not just talking about the US regulations or Singapore regulations. We also need to comply with all other countries that having the export control rules and regulation.
Well, from my experience, a small company set up here in Singapore with an employees about 12. But these companies, they are going into the R&D, technology development. So the top management start from the beginning, realize that there's an export control system in place within Singapore legislation. So the top management understand that it is important for them to establish an internal compliance program, although they only have 12 persons. Because those technology that they developed here in Singapore could contribute to some of the weapons of mass destruction. So regardless of the size of the company, even before they embark on the business, they're already in place the internal compliance program. So this is the first type. The second type, more on a SME, smaller company. They receive a strong recommendations from their main customers, overseas main customers, that they require to have a system to make sure that all the information that pass to this small SME will be safe, and it will be only utilized for manufacturing or utilized for researching or developing certain technologies based on the customer's requirement. And based on this, the CEO realized in order to expand their business, this is a way, this is a key. So the company invested in this internal compliance program. Although they start off with very small, they don't even have a dedicated person. So the engineers who were tasked to develop the program become the head of the export control officer. So this is definitely another cases whereby the customer require you to set up your internal compliance program. And by doing so, you expand your business. And the third, which is a company who received a letter from Singapore Customs saying that most likely the products that you are exporting falls under the export control list. And they do believe that you do not have applied the relevant permit. So company received this letter, definitely know they could have violated the Singapore law. So they start to look into what exactly this law is, because they have never learned about this law before. Or they may not be doing it by themselves, but rather some other companies or some other suppliers helping them to do it. So now they realize it is their own responsibility, because they are the one who export the product out of Singapore. So the third level of companies realize that it is their responsibility. And they start to check the transactions back past 5 years. And they notice that there are quite a number of transactions that they exported without a relevant permit from Singapore Customs. So they start looking into the possibility of telling or appealing to Singapore Customs that they have passed violation. So remember, Singapore Customs do have a very, very good and robust program. What is that? Do you know? Nobody knows? Voluntary Disclosure Program, VDP. So that program is prepared as what some of the presenter mentioned. Although we have a system in place, but nonetheless, people do make mistakes, either without awareness or just an error. So such program helps you to step forward to Singapore Customs to declare what you have made and make a correction. So I think for all, whether it's a small company, medium-sized company, as long as you have the will, as long as you know that this program will help you in your future, this is not a cost. This is an investment. I think that answers your questions.
That answered it perfectly. Oh, I have a whole bunch more, but I'm going to give the audience a chance now. More questions? Great opportunity. Come on, more questions. Don't make me answer.
Come
Ask
on.
them all.
You should have tons of questions. How do you screen your end customers?
Okay.
Hi, I'm Vivian from SSMC. I would like to check if there's a need to track all strategic goods within the company or only during export then we need to declare. Especially during audit.
Okay. In our case, in our company's case, we classify everything. We do have 70,000 items, and we register all information into our database. But our child company, a small company, doesn't do that because they do not export all the time. So they make a classification when they need to export their products. So there are two cases. In our case, we have many sales organizations. Anybody can sell any products to any time. That's why we need to have the most updated information in our database.
For Keysight, we don't wait until the export shipment or audits. Whenever there's new product introductory, the classification has to take place first, where the HTS code and ECCN code will be assigned. So at that point of time, you already know whether the ECCN code is control or non-control product. Then come second is when there's orders, that's where you will be able to know where it will ship to, and that's where the license application, whether it requires or not, depends on that product, if it's a control or a non-control. So of course, again, in summary, most importantly is the classification comes first.
Okay, I think classification is essential. Just like your HS code classification. For any items, whether you are going to export or not to export, it will be good for you to classify it upfront. Even you sell to domestic market, does it mean that it is not possible to re-export out from your customer side? So you need to classify the products to make sure that you know whether these items falls within the control list or non-control list. Okay. Next questions? Yes. Sorry. Table 23.
In Singapore, it's mandatory to conduct awareness training for all staff. I'd like to know how you conduct the awareness training to all your staff in your company and how you keep track on that. Thank you.
We have several types of educations, and we do e-learning for all employees every year, including presidents, directors of the company. And that's not so complicated training. It's a very simple question and answers. And then, like I showed you, we have a export control staff in our organization. So we make a periodical training for those people, more specialized education about export control. And we do that twice a year. And we sometimes have a request from the certain organization to give them a export control training, like because they have new people coming in, so they need to be trained. In that case, they request us to make a training. So we make many kinds of trainings.
We have new hires during the orientations, and that will be covered in the new hires. Then, of course, we need to have awareness with the current employees as well to keep them up to date on what is the latest regulations about export control. And the training records have to be maintained and to be kept on who have attended, so that whenever it comes to audit, that will be furnished with all the listing of the employees who have attended on the training.
I guess the first stage is, if it is possible, send the staff to attend the customs training. It's a half-day training for all the basic export control. And besides orientations, your engineers, the engineers or the developers involved in the designing of the products, expect trades. And not forgetting, in Singapore, we have many foreign experts working here. If it is a Philippine citizens, just now you heard from Janice, when they are handling any items related to export control or the control items, he or she also need to follow the Philippines regulation. So these are some of the areas definitely you cannot forget, especially in Singapore context, when we have in a company, we have so many foreign employees. And never forget, if you are doing R&D here in Singapore and involving US technologies, you may require to get a US export license as well in order to transfer the knowledge or to allow that employee to access to that particular technologies. So training is definitely very important for all the staff. You can divide your training into very fundamental, basic, for example, during the orientations to the new employees, and you can have slightly more specific trainings for those who directly involve in the technologies or designs or utilizing use of that piece of equipment. Or you can have a higher management trainings. Train your CEO, train your COO, how they should look into export control from the company's perspective. So training can be divided into multi-levels. And today, I understand many companies start going into e-learning. And e-learning definitely is a very good tool. And you have to make sure every year you conduct the refresh course. Can I have the next questions?
My name is Xiao Feng. I have a question. So sometimes we deal with suppliers who give us wrong classification. I would like to check with both of you, the three of you, whether do you have such experience, and if yes, what was the repercussion?
The classification, when we purchase other manufacturers' products, we also receive the classification explanation sheet. And we double check the contents of the explanation sheet. So we just don't request to tell us if it is a list control item or non-control items, but we also request the reason of the classification. So we also double check the specification in accordance with the regulations. So it is seldom to find the wrong classification, but we do that. We do make a double check by ourselves.
Okay, so we also have suppliers as well in purchasing the raw materials, and we also do face, there are times where their classification and our classification are different on the interpretations. So what happened is we will have our own classifications. We will, it's not to say challenge or argue back, but we have to come to a consensus and discuss back with that vendors, especially dealing with our buyers back, to come to a consensus of what will be that classification. So in a case where we cannot conclude, where we can have same code, the advice is we need to go back to the authorities to make the confirmation or the conclusion of the classification.
Always remember, the exporters will be accountable should there be any violation. Of course, the entire supply chain will also hold responsibility in the case whereby the suppliers, during the whole supply chain, they will be involved in any violations. So being an exporter, whether you are just a trading company or you are a manufacturing company, as long as your name appeared on the export declarations, you have to take up the responsibility of classifying the products. If there is any discrepancy between you and the suppliers or the information they received, as what Keysight mentions, discuss and come to the worst case, get a ruling from the authority. So coming back to the earlier panels, one of the ladies asked about the EAR 99 and the unlisted items. Let me just reiterate. EAR 99 is only used in America. It's an American term, not other terms, not other countries are using that. EAR 99 in US means it's a non-control if it is exporting to non-risk countries. But if it is to a D5 countries or so, you need to apply license. And for Malaysia, the EAR 99 is exactly equal to the unlisted item. So it is different terms that the different countries are using. So as an exporter, as you have done it correctly, that is, you have to verify whether your products is control or non-control. But don't be mixed up by the terms used by individual country. Same, everybody use ECCN. ECCN is an American term, Export Control Classification Number. So in Singapore, what terms we use? Anybody knows? Yes? Louder? Product code. Yes, product code. So we don't use ECCN. You have to write product code in your customs declaration. All right? Next. Yes, another questions?
Okay, I can see that both companies do check for end user.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to check whether, do you check the subsidiaries of the end user? If so, how do you check?
Subsidiary of the end user.
Well, for the end user check, in regulation, you have to check the end user itself. But we also check the parent company, because the child company is affected by the policy of a parent company. They might divert our products to a parent company later, so I don't want that happens. So we check if the parent company is related to WMD or military or something like that. And then if we have some concerns, we ask the end user to submit us the statement of compliance. So to answer to your questions, we check end user first, but we also see their parent companies.
For Keysight is whenever there's latest restricted party list on the companies that is put on the list, and if there's a subsidiaries company, of course, at first we need to look in all our customer database, not just the main companies. We also need to look all of the subsidiaries companies who are in the listings as well. When it comes to end user for transaction basis, we only screen on the end use company by itself. So there are two portions. So one is from the customer database, and the other portion is on the transaction base.
My recommendation is, as long as you know, you remember just now Teresa mentioned, know your customers. As long as you know, as long as you can gather information about that company, whether it's the subsidiary companies, their suppliers, their parents' companies, by all means, just screen it. Because screening takes seconds. It doesn't take you hours to screen it. So usually, we recommend, as long as you know, during the process of confirming whether you want this to get this order or to register this customer into your systems, make a record of when do you check record keeping, so that you know during the time when you engage these customers, this has been checked. But of course, subsequently, when you want to do a transaction screening, most of the company will only screen that particular end user, or during shippings, before the goods leave your company. Usually, you at least screen one more time to make sure that the party was not in the denial party list of any country. Okay, I think our times are almost up.
Yeah, we got
last
time
questions.
for one last question.
Yeah, one last question. Can I have the summary slides up,
Hi.
please?
Can you stand up, please?
I'd like to ask the panelists, how do you do a systematic profiling of your customer to pick them up for audit?
You are addressing this too?
Both.
Oh, both. Okay. Yosini, so.
Okay, for the end user check, we do have some database, the contractor database, which contains all the history of concerned entities. So, and also we check their website, and we also have our own database which contains a transaction check history for decades. So when we have the transaction approval request first, then we go into our own database and to see if there is a same contractor, same end user, same products. Then we can say it is a repeat orders, no concerns. But if we don't have any records in the past, we go for the contract outside database to see if there is any concerned history in the past. And then we go into their website to see if they are doing something wrong. So that's almost everything we do for end user check.
For Keysight, we rely on the trade compliance systems where our trade automation, where they have the background of all the sources coming in with the latest denial lists from all countries in export control. So when the latest list is published and it's into our trade compliance system, that's where all our backlog orders will be screened through again whether the orders will be putting on hold or not. So that will be taken care of through our trade compliance system.
I think for end user checks or screening, there are two approaches that you always have to remind it. First is your own searching. For example, your sales report, your marketing sales report, as well as your engineering report. When they visit the customers, talking about the projects and so on, definitely they should produce a report. This is very important. And besides doing your own internal assessment of the reports, you also engage an external party from a third party's view on that particular customer or end user. Like what just now Yokogawa mentioned, they engage or they farm out such requests to an external party. Just like most of the company, when your finance, before they accept the customer or register the customers into your financing systems, they will first assess their audited report, whether the creditability of the company is good enough to pay when you start business with them. In fact, I worked with companies 20 over years ago to come up with a comprehensive report, which is catered for export control requirements. They have the executive summary of the company, the details of the company's top management, what are the business they are in, what types of products they are handling, where are their territories, who are their suppliers, who are their customers. All these are some of the basic informations that you need before you can embark or before you can transact with that particular customers. Okay? So it is up to individual company to decide how you want to go about it. But I think we have quite a number of exchange of information today. I have just tried to summarize what we have discussed. So before we go into that, let me just refresh everybody. Within Singapore, we have the basic ICP elements. These are the seven elements that every company, if you want to apply for bulk license. And we have two different types of bulk license. Okay? So basically, all of you need to have the ICP before you can start applying for the bulk license. That is through the trade first. Scott keep talking about trade first. So do go through the trade first, because Singapore Customs have make it so easy in the sense that it integrates the AEO and the STP and the STS together for the industry. So understanding what is this ICP, next you have to look into your own business. What is a business risk exposure? As you can see from the two companies, the ICP are quite different. So it doesn't have one single size of ICP that fits into all organizations. You have to look for your own business requirements. And it doesn't mean that you have such a thick ICP, that means it's robust. More importantly, you have to reflect the actual business practices and the check and balance. That is more important and actually has to be very, very practical and operational focus. And as what the Japanese system, they have the management, procedures, and the review. So there are three different sections that you have to look into. And understand various regulations. Just now we talk about company have their business in other countries. So you have to understand every jurisdiction's, the legislations, their licensing procedures, and their requirements. So you have to know your system have to fit into all this. So you have to have a robust classifications of various countries. And as Eliza from Malaysia mentions, they just adopted the EU 2017 list. Singapore also adopted the 2017 list. But EU is going to start 2018 list. Although we are all using the EU list, but the timing of adoption is different. So some may already be deleted, no longer in the control list, but some still exist in the control list. So you have to be very, very careful in terms of your classification. So I always request company to set up a classification with different jurisdictions so that you know when you export to that particular country or out from the country. And ICP will help to minimize business risk related to compliance costs. And the reputations will be tarnished if you have violated, like what Igari mentioned about how the whole export control changed overnight in Japan in 1987. So always remember, to embark on the ICP is an investment. And never forget, should you make a mistake, do step forward to the authority, and I believe voluntary disclosure definitely will be a good tool for you to make yourself a better advancement in terms of your business. But how? What we are talking about here are mostly multinational companies. They have employees of 18,000, 12,000. But how about companies that having small operations? Always remember, what we are looking at in terms of export control is the 5W, the 4W and 1H. What you export? Who are you exporting to? What will it be used for? And where will this go? So this 4W, even in a small company, you can conduct your check. And finally, once you know that this is a control item, how do you apply for an export permit? So in a very simple one glance, these are the 4 areas that you have to look into. I just repeat, who am I selling to? What is the end use? What is the items being exported? And where will this export goes to? And with that, you determine whether a license is required. And if it is required, where, how you apply for the license. With that, we conclude this panel of discussions, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A lot of information, a lot of chance, again, to use these 3 experts up here as a sounding board. Hey, I have a question for you. Hey, our company does it this way. What do you think? I mean, these are multinational companies that have multiple jurisdictions they deal with when export controls. Like you heard George say, it's not just U.S. export controls. It's not just Singapore. With the Philippines coming up, all of these companies are going to have to start getting involved in those issues and those locations also. Great opportunity. So our next presenter is Ms. Irene Ho. She's the Assistant Head of Company Compliance Branch for Singapore Customs, and she'll be talking about compliance across the supply chain.
Yeah, thank you for the insightful discussion and sharing by Kisai, Ugogawa, and George on compliance on strategic goods. And this is very similar to what I'm going to present now. So good afternoon, I'm Irene from Company Compliance, Singapore Customs. So I'm going to share with you on what are the best practices for shipping goods specifically for traders, declarant agent, and freight forwarders. Okay, I'm going to share on what are the common non-compliance areas that we found during our audits and checks on traders. And I also highlight on what are the do's and don'ts and how traders can do to be self-compliant to custom rules and regulation. And of course, lastly, I also list out the resources available online in our website also. Okay, so we will highlight some of the common causes of non-compliance which you should avoid. Traders and freight forwarders often fail to take up the necessary permit. Why? Because maybe due to lack of awareness that the goods that they handle are strategic goods, or due to miscommunication or poor information flow between parties along the supply chain. And very often, traders and manufacturers are granted license exemption in one country, and assume that it applies universal throughout the supply chain. And this is not correct, because each country regulation on strategic goods different from each country. And so it's important to know Singapore regulatory requirements and also be familiar with other country regulation as well to reduce cases of non-compliance. There are also a group of traders who flout the law intentionally and allow sensitive equipment to fall into the wrong hands. For example, traders choose to ignore red flag detected during their screening of their customer or end user, And if your customer deliberately requests to ask you to mask the strategic good and you agree, you'll be penalized. And traders that did not declare the permit correctly or did not pay close attention in checking the permit declared by a declaring agent also attribute to non-compliance. And here are some examples that we often encounter during our audits and check. Traders who did not plan well ahead of their shipment and apply for individual strategic good permit less than 5 working days, and will result in the goods removed from the premises before the permit can be approved. And in our website, it's very stated very clearly that you have to apply for the individual strategic good permit at least 5 working days before the goods are exported out or transit through Singapore. Traders should also ensure that they use an updated version of control list. And do you know that the latest version control is already available in our website, which came into effect 1st November 2018. And also, in your permit declaration, avoid using general description of goods such as aircraft part for commercial aircraft or integrated circuit board. You have to declare the parts, the model, the brand, and the specific description of the item as well in your permit declaration to Singapore Customs. Different permit may have different permit condition, and so traders must check and look out for the permit condition that is listed at the end of the permit as well. So, your business could face risk as a result of non-compliance at transshipment and transit port around the globe. Your shipment may be delayed if you do not provide the necessary information to your freight forwarders for them to take out the correct permit at the ports or transit port. And if offense is detected, your goods may be forfeited, seized, or disposed of. As a result, it causes your downstream reputation damage, not able to fulfill the contract agreement with your customer. And in the current tense global security climate, your business can also suffer from negative publicity associated with strategic good-related offenses. Non-compliance may also result you to pay heavy penalties and possible ban for future shipment. Conflicted entities may risk being listed in various denial lists and face future shipment ban from those compliance companies as well. Next, in the second part of my presentation, I will share on some of the best practices and do's and don'ts for all parties in the supply chain involved. Okay, for the next 2 slides, I'm going to share the best practices which are applicable for all parties in the supply chain. Who they are? They are the traders who handle the control goods, declaring agent who declare the permit, and freight forwarder who manage the logistic arrangement. Whichever role you play in the supply chain, do conduct due diligence check on your customer and end user to check if they are sanctioned by the United Nations Security Council or any red flag detected during correspondence with the companies. For example, if the customer identity is not clear or the customer is reluctant to provide information regarding the end use of the item, do not continue with your relationship with the customer before finding out more. And also, do check the item in question, which is it aligned with the business cooperation or not. If you find that what the business is doing and the item in question is different, then this could be an indication that something could be wrong also. So these are some examples of red flag that you should look out for. For employees who deal directly with customer, you should look out for this red flag and report to your management accordingly if you detected any of this. And do read through documents carefully to identify possible control item. Indicator include in the presence of, like say, product code and ECCNs 9A610 in the invoices or any shipping document, or in the invoices it describes aircraft part for military airplane F-16. So you know that these are some indicators that tell you that it's a control item. And so you should apply for the appropriate strategic good permit. And to help in your check, there's a guide on determination of strategic good that you can use to identify if the products are controlled. You may also approach customs for assistance by emailing to our classification department as well. So whenever strategic goods are exported, transit or transshipped through Singapore or being brokered or the technology is being transferred, it is important for traders, declaring agent, and freight forwarder to clarify with the relevant parties on the content of the item, of the consignment. Do not proceed with the transaction if you found any defect detected during your screening of your customer. For example, customer insists on paying cash for their transaction, or when trader does not inform declarants that the content of the item may be classified as controlled goods and only provide genuine description of the items, or the previous party is not aware of the content of the item is being importing or exporting out of Singapore. So these are some of the examples you should look out for. Traders and declaring agents and freight forwarders are also advised to inform Singapore Customs if there's any changes to your company particulars. Why? Because this is to ensure timely update on any changes in our regulation. For companies that subscribe to our TradeNet services, circular and notices will be sent to you to update if there's any change in the strategic good control or if there's any changes in our custom procedure as well. If you are under any custom-related scheme related to strategic good control, you must comply with the requirement and the licensing condition as well. For example, if you are a registered broker, you must submit a half-yearly report to us as well. So all parties involved in the supply chain are reminded to retain the document for at least 5 years. This is according to our local regulation, custom rules and regulation. This document includes permits, invoice, packing list, your end user statement, import as export authorization, or any relevant supporting document for your transaction. Okay, for this slide, I'm focusing more on for declaring agent. And these are the best practices recommended for declaring agent. For the first point, we have highlighted that it is important for all parties to read through all documents carefully to identify possible control item and the telltale sign. So as a declaring agent, you are declaring permit on behalf of your company or your customer to Singapore Customs. Therefore, it is important that you look out for possible control item so that the correct permit can be declared. For example, for strategic good, it will be SO permit. Before declaring, ensure that you have all the documents and information required for permit declaration. This includes packing list, area bill, BL, and user statement, and export license if applicable. And if you are unsure of any details or have identified any discrepancy in the documents or info provided by your customer, do check with the relevant party. Do not declare blindly. And as a responsible declaring agent, you must have clear internal working procedures and guidelines. For example, do not make a declaration without verifying the credibility of the documents provided by your customer. Do provide clear description of your item when you declare your item in a permit. For example, as I shared earlier, you have to list down the parts, the model, the brand, specific item description, and also indicate the end use of the item. For example, is it for telecommunication, for internal office use, or manufactured in a SIM card, etc. And also, do not make last-minute submission of the permit application, especially for individual strategic goods permit. Declaring agents are required to apply for the individual permit for at least 5 working days before the transfer of strategic goods. And do not accept requests from customer to make incorrect declaration. And during the process, if you have discovered you have made an error, you must immediately inform Singapore Customs so that the error you have, to identify that the error you have made in your permit submission to us. As I mentioned, as you are part of the supply chain, you have to retain your document for at least 5 years. And now I'll focusing on freight forwarders, the best practices for freight forwarders. For freight forwarders, especially when the customer appoints freight forwarders in export shipment, it is important to work jointly with the exporter to ensure compliance with the custom regulation. Often, overseas customers will appoint the freight forwarder because they are unaware of Singapore export control rules, and so it depends on you to do the proper documentation and take up the necessary permit. And the exporter, on the other hand, will have transferred the responsibility of the products once the goods have left their premises. And exporter would not be in contact with the freight forwarder and will not be able to provide the information or instruction on what's the content of the item or the permit you should have declared. So therefore, due to lack of communication or they do not communicate between these two important parties, it will often lead to non-compliance to custom regulation. Therefore, it is a best practice for the two parties, freight forwarder and exporter, to work together and avoid such non-compliance. So you must communicate between these two parties. And as a freight forwarder, you're the party who are physically handling the goods and the checkpoint and do clearance. So it is important to ensure that you continue to comply to the permit condition or the licensing condition. For example, if the permit requires you to produce a good and get endorsement at the checkpoint, you must do so. You must tell our driver that you have to get the permit and the goods produced and get endorsed at the checkpoint. And similarly, you have to retain your document for at least 5 years. It does not apply to only one, but all parties along the supply chain. So, to summarize, so this is a simple checklist that some best practices you can adopt to avoid non-compliance to the strategic good control regulation. First, check the transport routes of your goods and ascertain if your goods require export, transit, or transshipment authorization at the various port of call. Second, visually label all your strategic good trade internationally with export control classification number in your trade document, because it will help your freight forwarders to take up the proper documentation at the port of calls. And inform your freight forwarders and logistic provider that permit may be required to transit or transship your goods through the various port of calls. And provide your freight forwarders and logistic providers with the export control classification number and the corresponding technical spec if it is necessary. And lastly, be cooperative and transparent when supplying information on the end use and the end user of the item as well. So what George has mentioned about VTP, so I'm going to touch a bit on VTP, volunteer disclosure to custom. So despite your best effort to comply with the custom rules and regulation, you made a mistake, an error. So custom do allow voluntary disclosure. So in order to eligible for this VTP, the disclosure must be complete with all the relevant information pertaining to the error and the mistake. And it must make before any commencement or notice of audit check investigation by Singapore Custom. The VTP form must also be signed by the individual or the company who made the mistake or the error. And in your submission to us, you must also attach all the relevant supporting documents to help us in our check in the review of your application as well. And lastly, there is no limit for VTP on the time nor period for the error or mistake committed by the company or individual. So that's quite a good news to hear. Okay, so the last few slides, I'm going to highlight the resources available in our website that you can refer to pertaining to strategic good control. You can take some picture or what, yeah. So in our website, we also mention some example of the rate facts for you to take into reference as well. And if you are interested in our news or wish to attend our courses, you can visit this website, this link, which will provide the latest update regarding Singapore Custom in any changes in our strategic group or any changes in our procedure, as well as the courses available at our Custom Academy. And some of the useful links pertaining to strategic good as well. And to end my presentation, if you have any tips of or aware of any non-compliance relating to strategic good, you can call us or contact us at this number and email address as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we've come up to our afternoon break. It is now 3:20. We're going to start back up at 3:40. Again, we have a hard stop at 5 o'clock. So I'm going to give you guys 20 minutes to get some coffee. There is coffee and some munchies outside, so enjoy.